Good evening. Good evening and welcome to this conversation in Christian-Muslim relations based at the University of Edinburgh. I'm really honored today to be joined by Omar Mohammed, who is well known for his work in the public history of documenting the city of Mosul and its importance and its legacy. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Mosul, Pope Francis's recent visit, the importance of this, as well as the meaning of interreligious engagement in the city of Mosul. If you don't already know Omar, please do follow him at Mosul Eye on Twitter, as well as on his blog site. As a reminder, for those of you who are new to this, this will be an interview between myself and Omar for the first 20 or 30 minutes, but it's also an invitation to all of you to engage with questions. So if you comment either on Facebook or on YouTube, I'll be able to see those comments and bring them up to ask a question to Omar after we've had a little time to talk. So feel free to ask any questions that you might have, either based on our conversation or broader interest in the city of Mosul. So Omar, welcome so much thank you so much and welcome to the University of Edinburgh.
Thank you, Joshua. It's an honor to be invited by Edinburgh University and by yourself. It's a great opportunity, as you mentioned, that we had the last week, the Pope Francis, or as the Italians say, Santita, Papa Francesco. It was a dream that we never thought it will ever come true, but it did. It came true, and we have seen him praying inside Mosul. Just an introduction of who is Omar Mohammed. I am Omar Mohammed, a historian from Mosul, and was known until recently as the blogger behind Mosul Eye, which is a blog was established in Mosul after Daesh occupied the city in June 2014, where I posted and reported the daily life of what was happening inside Mosul, as it was the only source inside Mosul to tell the world what was happening, as I call it, minute by minute, which was in fact minute by minute, because I would go out, wander the streets and see what's happening, then tell the world what happened. Then I had, after 2 years, to flee Mosul, where I am exiled now, trying to reclaim as the introduction of this event said, trying to reclaim the narrative of Mosul, which happily Papa Francesco made clear and made true when he was praying in Mosul, which is that Mosul is a city of coexistence, a city of love, a city of peace, and we should keep thinking of Mosul this way until we protect and maintain this reality, rather than just following the what Daesh wanted to impose on the city.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Maybe to get us started, could you say a little bit about the symbolism of Pope Francis coming to Mosul and praying in Mosul? I know you tweeted an image that had graffiti of Daesh saying, "We will invade Rome," and now you have Pope Francis coming to Mosul. So Rome, in some sense, symbolically coming to the so-called capital of Daesh's caliphate in a very different way. Tell me a little bit about why you thought that juxtaposition was important and what it meant.
The Daesh wanted to invade Rome. The Bishop of Rome prayed in Mosul. It's the greatest message ever. Before I speak about why the visit of Pope Francis is very important to Mosul, as I called it also the last chance of Mosul, it's very important to note that there is a very long history of communication between the Patriarchy of Mosul and the Vatican. It's very old, since Leo the 13. Mosul became a very important a space for the Vatican when he thought that the Christian in Mosul would need a support. So he sent the Dominicans. And then when Mosul needed also support during what the people of Mosul call it the Great War, or in Arabic al-Harb al-Udma, the city was going through a famine, a pandemic, health, and economical crisis. So the Pope Benedict would send money directly to support the people of Mosul, regardless of their faith, through the Cardinal Behnam Benni. There has been a very long process of the Christian community and the Muslim community also in Mosul trying to get the interest of the Vatican to look at Mosul. We never succeeded in this, not even the generation before me, not my generation. The obstacles were very big, larger than we thought. But the fruits of a very important personality in Mosul, the Patriarch and now the Cardinal Luis Rafael Sacco, who kept telling the Pope, you have to visit Mosul. It's important to visit Mosul. And I also remember sending a letter to Pope Francisco in 2016. And I quote from my letter, I am not asking the King of Mecca, rather I am asking you to support Mosul. For the unjust will find justice under your umbrella, and the fear people will feel safe with you. I was quoting something from the early Islam and how Islam communicated with the Christianity at that time. So the significance of his prayer inside Mosul can be summarized in 3 points. And those are very important and essential points to our very existence in Mosul. First, he told the Christian that I am no more praying for you from Rome. I am praying for you on the same ground where you were persecuted, deported, and where your space of faith was destroyed by terrorism. He was giving them a sense that it's time to claim your land and to stay in your land. Second, he made a very clear message that hate and violence between religions can lead only to more violence, and that the only way to live in Mosul is to reclaim the coexistence and the diversity and inclusion of Mosul. He made it clear that Mosul is not a city of terrorism, it's rather a city of coexistence. When he mentioned the An-Nuri Mosque, the most symbolic site for Muslims, and then he mentioned the At-Tahira Church, where he also visited, to say that this is the city of everyone, it's the city of you, the people, and you can live together. But there is also a very important point he made, which is something that the government of Iraq didn't dare to discuss, or they have no interest in discussing, when he made it clear and asked the question that the Mosulis cannot ask because they are very afraid. So he did ask the question on their behalf: who sold the weapons to the destroyers and who is selling them the weapons? That's the question of not only the physical weapons that are being used to destroy cities, but it's the weapons that leads to violence, the dangerous ideas, the extremist ideologies, the radical ideologies. And then he made it also clear, and he was very wise in this when he said, or in a sense, he was trying to say that we shouldn't keep Christianity just inside churches or places of faith. No, they should. The only way is that they enjoy an equal citizenship before a strong constitution. That's why it's very essential. And it's the only time since the destruction of Mosul happened, since Daesh, it's the only time that the world see the city of Mosul, its destruction and its reality through a very honest and crystal clear eyes, which are the eyes of Papa Francesco. The man who, as I was speaking to Archbishop Najib Mikhail when he was standing next to him, he told me, Omar, Papa Francesco is taking a moment of silence and he is shedding tears while looking at the destruction of Mosul. Joshua, no one, not in the international community, not in the Iraqi government, no one have ever said or felt such thing toward Mosul. So yes, it means everything to us.
Wow, thank you so much for that. They touched on so many issues that we'll try to explore in the next half hour or so. So just to sort of clarify a little bit for those that don't know, Mosul and the Nineveh plains that surround it have a long history of interreligious diversity, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Yazidis, and others. And yet this history, which was long under majority Sunni rule, was allowed in various degrees of freedom to exist, right? The very existence of thousands of year old churches testify to this. But when Daesh arrived and established their caliphate, these were either destroyed or put under lock and key. And there's this sense that you're saying that while the international community cared about this when Daesh existed, since Daesh has been at least destroyed in Mosul, Mosul's fallen off the map in some ways, and that Pope Francis was able to bring light to that. Is that a fair assessment of what you're?
Yes. I am sometimes amazed when I see researchers or people trying to find evidence on the coexistence of Mosul. You don't need to search for evidence. The city of Mosul itself is an evidence. The urban structure of the city is the evidence of that beautiful coexistence and diversity of the city. Now, we all know that the old cities, the ancient cities such as Mosul, Aleppo, Damascus, etc., Jerusalem, they have this kind of distinction between what is a Jewish quarter, the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, etc. But when we look at the urban structure of the city and how the people developed their urban structure and their urban design, you can clearly see how they are connected to each other, that they all make a mosaic image. And when they enjoy their peaceful space and their religious space, they all meet in another space, the commercial space that they created, which is the old market of Mosul. That's where they have contributed over the centuries, not only to the character of Mosul, to the identity of the city, but even to the dialect of the city, to the proverbs of the city. There are clear and obvious evidence of that coexistence. Yes, it was the most harmful and the most dangerous moment in the history of Mosul is when Daesh happened. That this time, while we know that the destruction of the urban space of Mosul didn't happen at once, it was happening also over a century. During the Saddam regime, before the Saddam regime, there was this kind of a need for the different Iraqi governments to minimize the rule of Mosul and to manipulate its structure to keep Mosul in a kind of like a very limited position within Iraq, and this damaged the whole communities of Mosul, the Christian, Yazidis, Sunnis, Muslim, Sunnis, Shia, etc. But the movement of Daesh was very dangerous because this time it destroyed that evidence of existence I was referring to, the physical element of it, the churches, the mosques, the market, the old market where the Christian and Muslims, before them there were Jews who were all communicating. The Yazidis themselves, they can find a way out of the isolation in Sinjar, when they go to the markets in Mosul. Now it's the moment of trying to understand Mosul through its urban architecture and how the urban architecture influenced the diversity of Mosul, where you can find in the city of Mosul a mosque and a church designed by a Christian architect. And in one church you would have a verse from the Quran, and inside the mosque you have a verse from the Bible. That doesn't exist anywhere. It exists only in Mosul. So that's what I mean when I say, like, I am really amazed when I see people asking me about, can you give us an evidence of the coexistence of Mosul? You cannot search for it. It's the city itself.
Yeah, in some of the classes that I teach on Christian-Muslim relations, what is now modern Iraq plays a major role in the historical evidence that we look at. Places like Basra, Baghdad, Tikrit, Mosul are these centers of interreligious debate, dialogue, as you were saying, also art, architecture that exceeds these realities. Now, that's obviously hundreds of years ago, when this sort of golden age of intellectual exchange was taking place in Iraq. Can you say a little bit more about the reality of interreligious engagement before Daesh, maybe in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, or even up to the U.S. Invasion? What was the reality at that period before we get back into the Pope? Was there signs of engagement, or was the Ba'athist regime clamping down on any sort of interreligious?
Let's start from a very important point in the history of the interreligious dialogue in Mosul. Something happened in the 70s. The currently Cardinal Luis Rafael Sacco, who was just a priest at that time, and other intellectuals from Mosul of different faiths, they would meet in Maskanta Church, which is one of the oldest and most symbolic churches in Mosul. This was in the beginning of the 70s. They put a question on the table, which they didn't actually need to discuss at that time, because people were feeling or living at least in a peaceful space. You would have a French priest, other priests reside in Mosul. Maurice Fillet spent almost all his life in Mosul. Jean-Maurice Fillet, who wrote the history of the churches in Mosul, and also his very famous book, Assyria Chrétien. That kind of meetings, and a question that they put on the table is how can we continue living together? They had the sense of preparing themselves for the future. You see that in the 70s, they had a plan for the future. It wasn't about discussing current issues. No, they were living in peace, but they had the space, the intellectual space, to discuss how we can maintain this in the future. While these exchanges happened in the church, in Maskanta, as I said, they went through important discussions. They found important leads toward, before we start, Joshua, we discussed this very important idea, is how to limit the religious authority without limiting the freedom of religion, without limiting the freedom of people to practice their faith without feeling that they are limited. So these were very critical questions at that time. But at one point, when they reached a very important moment, what did the Ba'ath regime do? It was the moment when he made plots. He plotted against those Muslims who were communicating with the Christians, and he even used a dirty way to accuse them of sexual harassment in order to prevent them from going through such kind of communication and discussions. Then everything stopped. There was no more communication between Christian and Muslims. I'm saying here communication on a very deep level. The people were afraid. Saddam was imposing his own narrative. He was bragging about having a Christian minister. He was bragging about having that the founder of Ba'ath himself is a Christian, but he was using this for a political purpose, not for reality. And then the other destructive moment happened in the history of Mosul is what Saddam called the faith campaign, when everyone who was with Saddam all of a sudden became an imam or even a prophet, and they started preaching the religion that Saddam wanted. Then the Christian or the Yazidis and the other Muslims started feeling that they are surrounded, and this damaged the trust between the Christian and the Muslims. There was another attempt, I mean, apart from how bad the US invasion was, but the 2003 movement brought back that movement of the 70s again, where Luis Rafael Sacco and the others started discussing the same question again. Now that we have a better space, we have more freedom, let us discuss the same question, is how we can keep living together again. It's a very essential, a fundamental question that still needs to be answered. But only 1 year after they opened that question again, the 2004, where the terrorist organizations, the people who were getting killed, terrorism emerged from I don't know where, and they started not only killing those people, but also attacking churches, killing priests. More than 2,000 priests was killed since 2004 in Mosul. Not only ordinary Christians we are speaking about. We are speaking about a priest who might have been the changing force in the communities of Iraq. And then everyone stepped back, withdraw from any initiative to bring back this kind of coexistence again to the surface. Then there was a moment also in 2009 when the situation became much better in Mosul. They brought back the question again. Luis Rafael Sacco always say, my hand is open, my door is open, let's discuss a plan, a rescue plan for all our communities. He was saying, my people are leaving the country, I don't want them to leave. Iraq is going to be deprived of its own Christian, who are the oldest or the indigenous people of Iraq, and it's the reality that they are decreasing, their numbers are decreasing. But just 2011, the Americans did their mistake in 2003, but they did another horrible mistake in 2011 when they withdrew from Iraq again, and this was the kind of like they gave the kiss birth to the terrorism, and it was brought back again. And then now, how many Christians do we have in Basra? How many Christians do we have in Mosul? How many Christians do we have in Tikrit? How many Christians do we have in the oldest chair of the Church of the East in Ana and Rawa in Western Iraq? Nothing, none. They are living in Ankawa, and I have been speaking to the custodian of the Christian memory, whose house was destroyed by Daesh, and his library. And you know, Joshua, when a historian's library get destroyed, you know what it means.
Yes.
It's death to him. He tells me, despite the safety that he is living in Ankawa, in Erbil, he tells me, I feel I am foreigner here. He said, my home is Mosul, but he cannot return. He's even oldest than the Pope, and I was surprised that no one invited him, to be honest, invited him to meet with the Pope. This was something I discussed with the Archbishop of Mosul and even with Cardinal Sacco. However, Daesh came and destroyed. We thought that Daesh destroyed all the opportunities to raise back this question. But now, what is important about what Daesh did, or the consequences of Daesh, is that for the first time, the Muslim majority have probably felt or understood what is the meaning of this question that was raised in the 70s and why it should have been discussed in depth since that time, because they were afraid of that moment of the 2014.
Yeah, so you have this long history of slow emigration of Christianity out of Iraq that was happening from the turn of the century, really, but accelerating in the 70s and 80s, which is true across the board in most Arab-speaking countries. So I know, for instance, in Iraq, their estimates were about 1.5 million Christians in 2000.
If you may allow me, Joshua, I'm sorry for interrupting you. The moment we allowed the deportation of the Jews happen in Iraq, we prepared ourselves for Daesh in 2014. The moment we accepted that the Jews should be deported out of Iraq and their properties should be confiscated, the moment we allowed this, the moment we started teaching that the devil is Jewish, that anything bad is the Jew, that when you insult a person, you call him a Jew. The moment we allowed this in our societies, in our education system, in our government, we accepted the moment of Daesh to happen in 2014.
Yeah, that the unfolding didn't happen in 2014.
Exactly.
But the seeds, as you were saying with Pope Francis's comment, who sold the weapons, not just the physical weapons, but the ideological weapons.
Yeah, it's not that just the AK-47 or the MI6 or whatever kind of like shoot guns they have. No, these are not the weapons. They are not dangerous. It's the danger is what's inside the brain of the person who is holding that weapon, because you have armies and you have soldiers who are keeping peace. But what's inside the brain of that person is the weapon that Papa Francesco was referring to.
I've got a question from the audience that kind of feeds into the comment you just made about especially Sunni Muslims in Mosul. And this is coming from Jordan, who's based at Georgetown. You may see her in an hour. Can you read that?
Yeah, in the United States, much of the new reporting on Daesh in Iraq focus on how it persecuted and harmed religious minorities in its territory. Less was reported about how Sunni Muslims fared under the regime, and as a consequence, I think Americans were left with the impression that Sunnis universally fared well. Can you give us? Yeah, I mean, let me start with the first thing that Daesh did is what the Mosulis know now as the list of 2,700. It's the number of the people who were killed in a mass execution. They are all Sunnis who refused to obey Daesh. And Daesh killed more Sunnis than anyone did throughout the history. But the problem why you can see this in the international media is because Daesh was given an identity, and that identity is the Sunni identity. And in somehow, I would blame the Sunnis also for allowing this identity to be taken by Daesh. We should have heard a much more powerful voice from the Sunni leadership, but unfortunately we didn't, because I don't want to go through this problem of the authority in the Sunni Islam. I mean, this is a very big problem, and Joshua, probably you are well aware of this case of the Sunni Islam and the meaning of authority in its history. But the problem is that it's also part of the narrative that the Iraqi government pushed. The Iraqi government needed a community to take the responsibility for what Daesh did. And since Daesh claimed the Sunni identity, so the Iraqi government was happy with what they called it the collective responsibility. The Sunnis should take the collective responsibility. That not even the Iraqi government, and I hear this from European diplomats telling me that, yes, let's agree on the case that the Sunnis accepted Daesh, but they were also victims of Daesh. It's even within the international foreign policy regarding how they see what happened in Mosul. But if Daesh was fair in only one thing. It was fair and just in distributing its injustice. They didn't spare anyone, and they put the letter N, Noon, referring to the Christian. They put the letter M, Murtad, which means apostate, to the Sunnis who refused them.
Yeah, so there's a way in which the hegemonic idea of Daesh, both in terms of the caliphate, in terms of takfiring other Muslims. You see this on the destruction of Nabi Yunus or Prophet.
Yeah, almost all the Sunni religious space was destroyed by Daesh, starting from a Nouri mosque, ending like it actually ended by the Nouri mosque, going to the Nabi Yunus or Prophet Jonah shrine. So it didn't spare anyone. They killed the Yazidis, the Shia, the Sunnis, they didn't spare anyone.
So to go back to the original issue around Pope Francis's visit, one could say, here's a Christian Pope. Christianity obviously has a history of its own sort of political power coming as a protector. What stops this from, it's not Daesh, I'm not saying this, but why not just get rid of religion? Why interreligious dialogue? Why the symbolism? Why does the symbolism of a Pope matter for a Sunni majority city?
Well, I mean, we have to also understand that Iraq doesn't need the democracy now. It's not that Iraq doesn't need democracy, but democracy cannot be imported. Okay? Iraq needs the religious tolerance now, and the democracy will be an outcome of that religious tolerance. You cannot move. We are not Athens. We are not. We didn't create our democracy. The democracy that we have was imported from like an imagination of Bush, who was spending. I know that he was even sleeping on the couch in Beinica Library in New Haven. However, this kind of like religious tolerance is what we need. The religious authority in Iraq is what we need now, because the danger came from the religion in Iraq, and the destruction came from the religion in Iraq, because the religion was very kind of like we didn't know how to manage the religion in Iraq. It became the authority over everything. So anyone in any mosque can claim authority over a bunch of people and claim like send kind of like verdicts with fatwa, or is it fatwa, and ask someone to kill the people. So that's why we need to understand the religion in Iraq first, to understand the religious tolerance, and then to, as I said in the very beginning, and now I will repeat it again, to limit that religious authority without limiting the religious freedom, and also to end the authority of the tribal system over Iraq, because the mixture of religion and tribal system is what brought us the destruction. When you keep the religion in the hands of the tribal system that doesn't obey the constitution, or that doesn't follow the law or the constitution, the religion will be the ultimate and the most dangerous weapon in their hands. And this is exactly what happened in Iraq. You can see it in southern Iraq, you can see it in Mosul, you can see it everywhere in the country of Iraq. We need to go through this very difficult question. Where do we want in Iraq to put the religion? And this question requires really people who have deep understanding of the meaning of the civil state and the religion at the same time. So yes, it's very symbolic to have Pope Francis, and it's very wrong to say that he came only for Christian. The man himself didn't say that. He said, I came here for all humanity, for all the people who suffered. All the people of Iraq have suffered, and it's the time to heal their wounds.
And there's a way in which the symbolic, or you could even say in Christian language, sacramental nature of being there, of choosing to pray in this place of destruction. The very images that you shared with us, your experience of being there, enacts an alternative narrative than, you have al-Baghdadi climbing, to give a khutbah in all authority versus
yes. Let's be careful about this, Joshua. Sorry. Let's be careful about this very dangerous area of comparing the movement of Daesh with the movement of Pope Francis. Now, the Daesh narrative or the radical narrative is saying that all the Crusaders were fighting against the Islamic State.
Yeah.
And now they have sent the head of the Crusaders to say that we have defeated Islam. That's their narrative. And they have listeners. They have people who listen to them. Let's be careful about also repeating this narrative. It wasn't this. The man wasn't coming to Mosul to say that I am replacing Islam with Christianity. He said that the only way to survive is to live together and to accept each other. It's completely the opposite of the message of Daesh and the message of Baghdadi, who said, if you don't follow us, we will behead you, we will separate your head from your body. So it's not there are no more Crusaders. I mean, it's done. I mean, the Muslims have to understand that it's really done.
Yeah, no, I certainly don't want to draw a comparison, and that's helpful to push back on. I think in part, what I was trying to get at is the exact thing you're saying, the symbolism of not coming as the leader, but coming as a sense of service. And as he says in the recent encyclical, which in fact quotes Sheikh Tayyib of Al-Azhar about the importance of human fraternity. And I know this juxtaposition between human fraternity, which is grounded in an acceptance of diversity, and as you're saying, a mode of either national or religious belonging that would exclude others is one of the challenges. We have a few questions coming in, as well as some comments. If you're just joining us, you can ask a question or a comment. Mario, who I know is in Mosul, just wanted to say hello.
My greetings to Mario, Professor Mario.
It's good. Would be great to be together in person. And then we've got a note from Nigeria about just a comment about the impact of the papal visit and how important that is, as well as a current PhD student of mine who's working on interreligious peace in Abuja, Nigeria. So just to get them.
By the way, if you are speaking about Nigeria, we know the story of the priest and the imam. We were teaching this in Mosul in 2010, 2011. And he visited the priest and the imam, both of them, they visited Mosul. They visited Baghdad, actually.
Yeah. So there's these models of interreligious engagement. One of the questions is that some scholars of interreligious dialogue that are slightly more critical would say that a lot of these events are just PR events, right? So Pope Francis goes to the UAE, which is a way of reinforcing the UAE's role in the world, or that they're symbolic, but they don't have any lasting impact. How can an event like this have a lasting impact in Mosul?
You can rethink of his visit either to the UAE or to Iraq. You can really understand the depth and the importance of this visit, and that it's not just PR. When you look at the man, I think 84 years old is Papa Francesco. Is he 84 or 83 probably? When you look at this man who himself lived through a phase of violence in Argentina, when you look at his eyes, at his face, looking at the destruction of Mosul, praying for its people, you will definitely know that it's not a PR. when you stand yourself in the middle of this destruction, surrounded by all of the rebels that ISIS, Daesh, that used religion to justify its destruction, you will really understand that's not a PR visit. The need to such visit to Mosul, to Iraq, to the rest of Iraq is fundamental to our future in Iraq. And by the way, they didn't only speak about religion. For those who didn't follow the speech of Rafael Sacco, he focused on two important issues that the Iraqi government itself doesn't actually discuss. As I said in the beginning, an equal citizenship before a very strong constitution that protects everyone, and the climate change. Who is speaking about climate change in Iraq? Not the government, not the ministry of that is related to this kind of issues. The man is trying to tell us, people like Cardinal Luis Rafael Sacco, he is trying to tell us that we should get out of the places of faith. God, Jesus, Allah, Eliyahu, whatever his name is, that shouldn't be an issue. You shouldn't stay in your space of faith. You shouldn't just pray. You should go out and do service. And that's what Francesco did. He came all the way from Rome with all the objections that I am aware of, that were telling him, even priests from Mosul were telling him, do not come to Mosul. He said, I am going there. And he did.
Great. Yeah, there's a distinction in academic studies about sort of theologies of dialogue that focus on Trinity, prophethood of Muhammad versus dialogues of life. And what you're suggesting is this is a dialogue of life, a dialogue of public action. We've got a number of questions that have just come in, and I know you need to leave for another lecture at Georgetown. So I'll run through them. The first comes from a PhD student of ours, Lucy Scouten, who's actually looking at Jordanian Christian responses to Syrian and Iraqis. And so she's done a lot of field work in Jordan, in Amman, with especially Iraqis who are in Jordan, who are saying that they never want to return. Do you think that this will have any impact? I mean, I know in your own life
that's a very important question, Joshua, and thank you, Lucy, for raising this question. It's actually not in the hands of the Pope anymore. He gave the Iraqi government a roadmap. He told them Christians should have an equal citizenship in Iraq, protected rights. Now the question is, can the Iraqi government make use of this visit to convince the Christian to return? I find it very difficult. And I am very afraid and concerned that in the terms of 2 decades, we will be speaking about Christians and their heritage after they have left, which is something I hate so much to say, but I am afraid this is the case. And as I said in the beginning, when we allowed what happened to the Jews, we are allowing what's happening to the Jews is what happened to the Jews. We are allowing it to happen to the Christian. And if we don't stop it now, if we do not act now, as I said, in terms of 2 decades, we will be speaking about them in their absence.
Yeah,
it's very difficult. It's very difficult. Yeah,
it's an issue in a number of different countries. The challenge of emigration, and the Middle East Council of Churches has spoken out numerous times about it, beginning in the early 2000s. I guess maybe on a little bit of a more hopeful note, this is a question from Dorta. How do you translate some of this to the grassroots levels in terms of coexistence, undoing mistrust and resentment? How does your own work as a public historian, telling this longer story of Mosul, how might it serve to rebuild trust?
Yeah, three things. Do not keep history buried in books and lost in time. Make it public. Tell the people and make them aware of what happened, even if it's very difficult. History is not supposed to make us feel comfortable. History is not a rosy space and a cozy field. It's full of very uncomfortable things, but it's an obligation for historians especially to make this history public and readable by the people on the grassroots to know what happened. Second, the very important space is the art and culture. Third, the focus on youth and the youth leadership, whether they are religious or non-religious. The role of youth is the a turning point in our time now in post-Daesh Mosul.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think there's so much of an emphasis, as you've already put it, on religious authorities or academics as the center of life. But oftentimes, interreligious dialogue and exchange happens in life, in the engagements of arts, in history and culture and shops. And the assumption that it all goes through religious authorities can sometimes reinforce their own power in ways that can be a little bit problematic. I know we're running short of time, but want to get a few more questions in about Mosul. Here's one from my colleague Shadab Rahmatullah, and he's asking, we've talked a little bit about Sunni Christian. What about other relations? How is Yazidi Christian Shia, other traditions?
This is a very delicate and sensitive subject, but I have to say, and the Christian themselves say this, and I've been reading through the Christian manuscripts. It wasn't also a very good kind of history. The Christians were always trying to convert the Yazidis into Christianity, and the Jews as well. And there's a very famous manuscript written by a Jewish who was converted into Christianity, who is explaining or attacking Judaism, etc. The current Shia Christian relation is much more political, and it's not stable because the Iran-backed militias, which makes majority Shia in Nineveh plains, with the Christian, they have kind of like a domestic conflict over the lands in Nineveh plains. The Iran-backed militias, also the Shabak, who are kind of like represented by those militias, also are trying to reclaim their space because they were persecuted throughout the history, and they have suffered enough. But the problem is that this conflict is dominating the lives of the Christian, even in Nineveh plains, where we thought that they might have some peace. It requires political actions. It's still political, not religious, but at one point it might become religious, and that's the very dangerous moment if it happened.
Yeah, the ways in which what we call politics and religion are so intertwined in terms of history, engagement. There's not an easy diagnosis. But so I'm just looking through. I've got a number of other questions, but I'm aware we're running short of time. Are there any?
We still have time. We still have time.
Okay, shukran. So is there any? I know you wanted to talk a little bit about this notion of reclaiming and rebuilding the interreligious heritage of Mosul. Is there something more that you want to say about how interreligious dialogue might be turned to that question? We talk a lot about, you said, these moments in the 70s, in 2004, where there's this moment of opportunity. Is this possibly one of those moments, or is the social political?
It's possible for two reasons, Joshua. First is that I go back to the visit of the Pope. First, we know, or we should know, that Cardinal Luis Rafael Sacco was suffering from a very big pressure from other Christian leadership. The visit of Pope Francesco gave him support, and it seems, according to what I have seen, that Sacco is kind of like balanced now. He feels that he has enough authority and enough power to pursue this question. Second, we need the Latin Church or the Dominican Church in Mosul to reopen very soon. I hope that the UNESCO will do this very soon, because once this Latin Church is open, which didn't serve only as a religious space, but it also served as an intellectual space. Once open, we will have too many important narratives of coexistence to reclaim with the evidence of the existence of the Saa Church or the Latin Church or the Dominican monastery. And the rule of the Dominicans have always been very positive. Yes, I say reclaiming that movement is possible, but there are conditions. We need people who have the will to do this. I can see that there are. On the Christian side, for example, we have seen how Papa Francesco embarrassed Father Raed, and how Father Raed was very smart in saying this sentence of saying that I am living among 2 million Sunni Muslim, and they all call me Abuna, and I live in peace with them. Abuna is father. So this was the message from such kind of a priest, that the door is open to reclaim that question and to start thinking of our future.
Great. Thank you so much. One maybe quick final question. One of the issues, obviously, is that interreligious dialogue and political power often is very male-centric. And Whitney's wondering, how has religious tolerance, especially played out in terms of women's roles in Mosul or in Iraq? She also asks, what's the current narrative about women in terms of the future of Mosul, or is this still sort of, is interreligious dialogue so?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's still a space that women are not allowed to enter, either by the communities or by the religious authorities or religious leadership. It's still a space where women have no ability to act. But the alternative of this is that in academia, we are having more women interested in religious and interreligious studies, which is a good sign that might one day hopefully lead to have a women's voice in such kind of discussions. But it's kind of like a long shot, as the Americans say.
Yeah, just to pull up a few more comments before we go. Shadab thanks you for your critical comment to his question and being honest about the complexity of the situation. Marina Ghali, who is in the States, Egyptian American, is grateful for our conversation today. And we've got a number of other people just welcoming us and being involved.
Many thanks to all of them.
So let me just conclude by thanking Omar so much for spending some time with us today. Just as a reminder, if you don't already, if you're on Twitter, be sure to follow him on the Mosul Eye. He's posted a number of interesting images, pictures, discussions of Mosul and of the history of that fascinating city. Also, if you're new to our channel, please do follow us at the Christian Muslim Studies Network. We've got a Facebook page, a Twitter page, and of course, we also have currently running a free 4-week online course on Christian Muslim relations, covering a number of different issues from the prophethood of Muhammad to the history of the Hagia Sophia to modern Egypt. So feel free to enroll in that, and do consider reaching out if you'd like to do any further study. So let me just conclude again by thanking you so much for spending your time. We have a shukran jazilan, and hope that your continued work can reap benefits in raising awareness to the long history of this fascinating city, and most importantly, the samud and sabar of its people. So thank you so much, Omar.
Thank you, Joshua. I cannot stop. I cannot give up. This is a lifetime responsibility that I have accepted, and I will not stop until I see Mosul moving on the right path. And hopefully we will all hear the bells of the church, the adhan of the mosque, and the prayers in the synagogues, and the lights of the Yazidi shrines, where we all can live peacefully, accepting each other without having to follow each other's religion.
Yes, thank you so much for that beautiful ending. So we'll see you again.
Salam.